Oh, hi guys. So we're back, and no, I did not leave to go and shower. My service provider actually went to zero, so I had no choice but to actually try and change the device and switch over to my other service provider, um, which I realized did not have. Thank you, Siobhan. Did not actually have service on it, and so it took actually some time to get back over here. But thank you guys for tuning in. And if you're just joining us, what we're doing on this live is actually going through the TransJamaica Highway Prospectus. Now, as I mentioned in the first live, and I'll link that down below. What we're doing so we're going over the financials. We're going over some of the risk, the growth prospects, as well as the expectations for this company post IPO. So I'm going to skip over all of the basics with regards to the IPO. So if you guys actually want to get up to speed on the basics, if this is the first time that you're hearing about the TransJamaica IPO, please go over to Kalila Reynolds' channel. That's Kalila Ray, or just type in Kalila Reynolds, and she has a really good review of the TransJamaica IPO, the overview of the prospectus, as well as she did an interview with the minister with regards to it on taking stock. So you guys can actually go and watch that. In this, I'm going to be going a bit more in depth, looking at some of the fundamentals of the company, and I'm going to be doing two things primarily, and this is where I really think it would be valuable for you guys. I'm going to be passing the TransJamaica IPO under what I call my 7 pillars for successful value investing. So I call it my 7-pillar test. Now, what the 7-pillar test is where, all right, Maverick, thanks. So that's good. So they will be good for you. I think this will be good for you. So what I'm going to be doing in terms of the 7-pillar analysis for this video is we're going to be looking at my 7 P's for analyzing a stock, and that will actually explain to you why I've made the decision I've made in terms of participating or not in this IPO. So I said this in the previous live, that's listed below, but I'm going to say it here just in case there are new persons coming on. This review is meant strictly for educational and information purposes. I am not a licensed financial advisor, nor am I an investment advisor. I'm a financial analyst, and so what we will be talking about in this is not supposed to be misconstrued as me giving you financial advice or saying that you need to participate in this IPO or neglect it. You are encouraged to speak with your licensed financial advisor or your licensed investment advisor with regards to making your investment decisions. And most of you know this already, but there are multiple reasons for that. They will know what your risk tolerance is, they know what your time horizons is, and what your time horizon is, and they actually know a little bit more about you in terms of how much money you can actually invest and what your risk tolerance is as it relates to potential losses on that money. So having said that, let's continue with this review. So the 7 P's that I'm going to analyze TransJamaica on are price. Then I'm going to look at the historic profitability. That's profitability, TABILITY. Then I'm going to look at the projected growth and future profitability. That is the ability of the company to realize more profits going forward. After that, we're going to look at, I think that's 3. We're going to look at the people in the business. That's the management of TransJamaica Highway. Then we're going to look at the psychology of the market. That's what the market is basically saying about TransJamaica, and so that will feed into what the post IPO or what the listing expectation is. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the role of patience, and particularly my attitude of patience as it relates to participating in IPOs generally. And then lastly, if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this, please feel free to just put them in the comments. I have the other device over here, so I'll be able to see your comments and then I can respond. All right, so let's just test that out. Great. Okay. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about, most of you already know that TransJamaica is being listed at $1.41, and the perception is that it is expensive compared to a week done, for example. I don't agree with that perspective, and the reason for it is because TransJamaica is a completely different asset than week done. Additionally, TransJamaica's balance sheet, which I will reference in the prospectus, is far stronger than, say, a week done. So if you look at the company's total assets, for example, the total assets for the company amounted to 293 million US dollars. Where is my calculator? Sorry, calculator. Not working. So, sorry. So that's well into the billions in terms of the company's total assets. The total shareholders' equity of the business is accumulated profit, total shareholders' equity is 59 million US dollars. All right. So already we're seeing that this company, just on the balance sheet analysis alone, is looking far stronger than a week done. The other thing that we have to consider is that whereas week done came to the market listing 11 billion shares, TransJamaica is coming to the market listing 8 billion. And I should mention here that that was actually upsized. On Sunday, the company, there was a report in the Jamaica Observer that the company has taken the decision to upsize the offer. So now there will be 10 billion shares being offered. Of that amount, I believe it's around 5 billion or so that's going to the general public. And the total amount that is expected to be raised will be 14.2 billion Jamaican dollars. Let me say this as it relates to that upsize, however. The upsize is a good indication of where the demand is for this offer. However, we cannot just look at that and say, okay, that's the demand. You have to consider that a majority of the shares in this offer, and I'll tell you exactly how much, is actually being reserved for reserved shareholders. And so that means that the amount that is being sought from the general public in the case of TransJamaica is, well, initially it was less than the amount that the government of Jamaica was trying to raise in the week done IPO. So that's just a little food for thought. And then you guys can look at the reaction to week done. Another good point in terms of just the perception around TransJamaica IPO, and most of you have probably seen this on Taking Stock already, was that the bond that they actually issued earlier this year was oversubscribed. And already this decision to upsize is evidence of the amount of interest that is being placed within this company. My concern as it relates to this is that there are persons who are not fully understanding what the TransJamaica IPO really is, as in what the company is, what the asset that is being offered is, and I think they're just buying based off sentiment. This prospectus is 292 pages long, and I literally went through with the fine-tooth comb and highlighted some of the key things that I think investors ought to be cognizant of, both the positive and the negative, just so we're clear. All right. So right, we're looking at the audited financials. So what I'm going to be looking at now in terms of the company's financial position is their balance sheet as well as their cash flow statement. In the last live, I mentioned that the revenues for 2018 were a little bit skewed based on the roadworks that were happening on the Mandela Highway, and that most of that has now been resolved. And so we can actually look to 2019 revenues as being revenues that are representing a thorough idea of what the company's collections will be in terms of sales. Well, total revenue. That's really what I should say. All right. So I won't use the interim. I'm going to go to these are the notes to the interim. So the financial statements actually start on page 138, and the first one that's there is the company's unaudited interim financial statements for the 9 months ended September 30th, 2019. If we're analyzing the balance sheet, and for most of you may not be familiar with the process of analyzing a balance sheet, but there's a video on Beyond the Stock Price that actually takes you through the entire process of how to understand the balance sheet for different companies, as well as how to analyze them, calculating the ratios, noting what you should be looking for and the directions that they should be going. After this live, I'll actually link to some of those videos down below and some useful articles as well. So if we're looking at the company's balance sheet, the total assets were around 293 million US dollars. And you guys can convert this to Jamaican. I'm not going to do that now because I know the exchange rate will fluctuate over time. All right. Now that's slightly lower than the 310 billion that we saw in December of December 31st, 2018. However, what we have to remember is that these are the unaudited results and they are up to September of 2019. What that means is that there is 3 months of results that are not accounted for within this statement of the total of the company's total non-current assets. So you really want to bear that in mind. If you considered that the company's assets were going to if you consider that the other 3 months could see an impact on the company's balance sheet, then that will actually affect how you look at assets. And in this case, the asset is an infrastructure asset. So how we deal with that in terms of the depreciation and the amortization is slightly different than we would, for example, the assets of a manufacturing company, for example. All right. So let's look at some of the constituents of what those assets were. Total non-current assets amounted to 290 million US dollars. What that means is that the majority of the company's assets are actually in the form of long-term assets. All right, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to address that comment in just a second. But let me just finish the point here to say, if we consider that the majority of the company's financial assets are in the long-term assets, this $290 million that is represented here for the unaudited results up to September 30th, 2019, then we can expect that the company will have a lower amount of liquidity going forward, because of course we would have expected that the total assets is comprised of the non-current assets and the current assets. And if you look on the statement on page 141, you will notice that current assets only amounts to 2.7 million US dollars, whereas the non-current assets are 290 million US dollars. All right. That being said, You want to also look at the notes as it relates to what comprises the company's. You also want to look at the notes as it relates to what actually comprises the company's current assets. The majority of the current assets, we're talking that 2.7 million US dollars, is actually in the form of cash. I'm anticipating that this will increase post IPO. The reason for that is because the company is going to be getting in cash from the sale of shares, and the fact that the company has upsized the shares mean that there is an additional 2 billion. It's 2 billion, right? 2.4 billion. 2.2 billion shares. So it means that the company is going to be getting in an additional $4.2 billion in terms of just raw cash to sit on its balance sheet. All right, and I'm not considering that there's a possibility that there will be some cash left after the company has paid for the expenses and taken care of that bridge loan that the company, the NROC, used to purchase all of the shares in TransJamaica. I'm not considering that. I'm just looking at the fact that the company has upsized, and it means that there is going to be an additional $4.4 billion that's going to be sitting on that balance sheet. Whatever else we get from the leftovers from the initial funds that were being raised, I'm just considering that the gravy. The key thing for me is this additional $4 billion. All right? Oh, short segue. If you guys recall, a few years ago, well, it was 2017, when Wisynco did their IPO, they raised just about $5 billion from the market. I think it was 6 billion. 6 billion, right? I think, all right, so let's call it 6 billion from the market. And in that IPO, the applications were so much that it actually amounted to, I think, somewhere between 17 and 18 billion dollars. So Wisynco's stock price was well, it was fairly valued, but the applications that actually went after the IPO was around 3 times more than the offer. If they had upsized, then I won't even get into that, but it would have mean they would have been the largest IPO in Jamaica's history. But that was just a segue, all right? So we talked about the company's assets. Let's look at the liabilities, because that's really the thing that we're going to have to look at in terms of what's really the cost to this company. So the total current liabilities, these are the payments that the company will have to make in the next 12 months or so, amounted to $22 million. That's 22 million US dollars. All right? So that would have meant that the company was in a relatively bad liquidity position. You have, what that means is that you owe around $22 million that you will have to pay out, and you currently have 2.7 million. That's a very large disparity. However, that I do not expect to be the case going forward. And I mentioned why earlier. We're seeing this IPO and we're seeing additional funds coming in to the business. All right. So key thing to kind of keep your eye on is how this current liability number will change after the IPO. Is there any bond offering for this stock? All right. I'm going to answer these 2 questions. So first, yes, there was a bond issue for the stock. The bond issue, however, was closed, I think, in the latter part of January, and it was oversubscribed. Again, if you watch the video on Khalila's channel where she interviews Dr. Nigel Clark, he goes into some of the details about the bond offer, as well as the persons who participated in it and what that will potentially mean for the company. The other thing I want to mention as it relates to that bond offer is that bond offer was also heavily oversubscribed. Okay? So right now it would be difficult, I think, to get access to TransJamaica Highway's bonds. I think they should be trading, so you might be able to actually buy shares, I mean buy the bond. That's something that I didn't look at. So thanks for that question. Now, Paul Davis, you have my name, sir, asks a question, and he asks, suppose everyone bought 1 million stock for $1.40.